The for sale sign was the first thing Chloe saw. It was a spear of red and white driven into the heart of their perfectly manicured lawn, an aggressive, alien thing against the familiar soft gray of the house. For a moment, her mind refused to process it. She thought it was a prank, a tasteless joke from a neighbor. But the name on the sign, Evelyn Reed, Reed and Associates, was coldly professional. It was real. Her luggage, a stylish leather weekender, and a larger matching suitcase filled with clothes that still smelled faintly of sea salt and another man's cologne, suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving her alone on the pavement, the silence of the quiet suburban street amplifying the frantic thumping in her chest. This was not the homecoming she had envisioned. For 3 weeks, she had lived a different life, a sun-drenched fantasy on the coast of Italy with a man who whispered promises as easily as he breathed. She had returned expecting to slip back into her comfortable existence, to be met with the quiet, predictable affection of her husband, Liam. She had prepared a story of self-discovery, of quiet reflection, of finding herself. She had not prepared for this. She had assumed Liam would be inside, waiting, perhaps a little lonely, a little needy, just as he always was. He thought their marriage was solid, a structure built on shared history and quiet compromise. He didn't know the foundation was riddled with cracks of her own making. Within the next hour, he would ensure she understood that the entire structure, the one she had taken for granted, was not a shared home, but a monument to his patience, and that patience had just run out. What they didn't know, what Chloe and her entire arrogant family had never bothered to learn, was that Liam, the quiet architect they treated as a serviceable but unremarkable addition to their lives, was the sole designer, builder, and owner of the world she inhabited, and he was about to foreclose. If you're enjoying this story, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to it. The key turned in the lock, but the familiar, satisfying click was absent. The door was already unlocked. A cold dread, sharp and unfamiliar, snaked its way up her spine. She pushed the heavy oak door open. The house was silent. Eerily so. The air was still and cool, lacking the usual warmth of a lived-in space. Her heels clicked on the polished hardwood of the foyer, the sound unnervingly loud. "Liam," she called out, her voice tight. No answer. She walked further in, her eyes scanning the immaculate living room. Everything was in its place. The minimalist furniture, the carefully chosen art on the walls, the stack of architectural magazines on the coffee table. But it was too perfect. It was sterile, like a show home. A thick, cream-colored envelope was placed dead center on the glass coffee table, her name written on it in Liam's precise, architectural script. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Inside was a single key, her house key, and a brief, typed note. It wasn't a letter filled with anguish or anger. It was a simple, factual statement. "Chloe, your belongings have been moved into a secure, climate-controlled storage unit. The details are with my lawyer, Evelyn Reed. Her number is on the sign. The locks have been changed. The house is being sold. I think you know why." Liam. The coldness of it was more shocking than any screamed accusation. It was an amputation. Clean, swift, and utterly final. This wasn't the Liam she knew. The Liam she knew was gentle, yielding. He absorbed her family's casual insults with quiet dignity. He tolerated her moods, her extravagances, her growing distance. He was the stable ground beneath her feet, the man who loved her more than she deserved, and she had used that love as a safety net while she learned to fly in other skies. Now, she was in free fall, and she realized with a sickening lurch that the ground she had so confidently leaped from was gone. Anger, hot and swift, surged through her, chasing away the fear. How dare he? How dare this quiet, unassuming man make such a monumental decision without her? She pulled out her phone, her thumb jabbing at the screen, to call her father. He would sort this out. He would put Liam back in his place. The call connected, and as she began to speak, her voice a torrent of outrage, she failed to notice a subtle change in the room. A faint, almost imperceptible scent in the air. It was the smell of fresh paint, the smell of a space being prepared for a new beginning. The memory of the last family dinner before her trip played in her mind, a bitter counterpoint to her current panic. It had been at her parents' house, a sprawling, ostentatious testament to her father's success in commercial real estate. The air was thick with the scent of roasted lamb and superiority. Liam sat beside her, a quiet island in the turbulent sea of her family's booming voices. Her father, Richard, held court at the head of the table, a portly man whose expensive suit couldn't hide a core of profound insecurity that manifested as relentless arrogance. Her mother, Eleanor, sat opposite him, a woman so polished and preserved she barely seemed human, her smiles as sharp and brittle as glass. Her brother, Marcus, a younger, cruder version of their father, was already on his third glass of wine, his laughter too loud. "So, Liam," Richard had boomed, gesturing with his silver fork. "Still tinkering with your little residential projects? Designing patios for dentists, are we?" The table chuckled. It was a familiar jab, one of many in their arsenal designed to remind Liam of his perceived station. They saw him as a small-time architect, a man who got lucky marrying into their world. They had no concept of the scale of his firm, the international awards he had won under a company name they never bothered to remember, or the quiet, substantial wealth he had accumulated through shrewd investments and a talent that bordered on genius. He never corrected them. He simply offered a small, patient smile. "Something like that, Richard," Liam had replied, his voice calm and even. "There's a certain satisfaction in creating a space that a family can call home." "Quaint," Marcus sneered, swirling his wine. "I prefer creating profit margins. We're closing on the new downtown tower next month. Biggest deal of the year. You wouldn't understand the numbers, Liam. Too many zeros for an artist." Chloe had felt a flicker of something, annoyance, maybe even shame, but she had squashed it. Defending Liam would mean upsetting the family dynamic, and it was easier to let him absorb the blows. She had placed her hand on his, a gesture that was meant to look like comfort, but was, in truth, a signal for him to remain quiet, to not rock the boat. He had looked at her then, his gaze clear and searching, and for a moment, she saw not the placid man she took for granted, but a stranger watching her from a great distance. The moment passed, and he simply squeezed her hand, a silent message of reassurance that she had misinterpreted as acquiescence. He wasn't reassuring her. He was stealing himself. That night, after they returned home to their beautiful, quiet house, the house Liam had designed and built, a fact her family conveniently forgot, Chloe had announced her trip. "I just need some time for myself, Liam," she'd said, avoiding his eyes as she folded a silk blouse into her suitcase. "To think, to reconnect with who I am. Just a solo trip. 3 weeks." He had stood in the doorway of their walk-in closet, a space larger than the first apartment they had shared. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. "Italy is beautiful this time of year," he said, his voice neutral. "I hope you find what you're looking for." The lack of drama had unnerved her, but she'd mistaken it for weakness, for his tacit acceptance of her emotional whims. She didn't know that he had already seen the cracks in their foundation, the subtle signs of her betrayal. The late-night texts she thought she'd hidden. The credit card bill for a single, expensive dinner at a restaurant she'd claimed to visit with a girlfriend. The way she had stopped looking him in the eye. He already knew. Her announcement wasn't a shock. It was a confirmation. And in that moment, as she packed for her lover, Liam the architect began drawing up the blueprints for a demolition. The true catalyst had come a week in her trip. It arrived not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a quiet, digital whisper. An email notification from their shared credit card account. It was a charge from a boutique hotel in Positano, a place famous for its romantic, cliffside views. The charge itself wasn't the issue. Liam had always been generous. The problem was the dinner reservation confirmation attached to the hotel folio, forwarded automatically by the booking system. It was for 2 people, Mr. and Mrs. Alastair Finch. The name hit Liam like a physical blow. A wealthy, silver-haired developer Chloe had met at a gallery opening months ago, a man who oozed the kind of lazy, inherited confidence her father worshipped. Liam sat in his home office, the cool blue light of the monitor illuminating his face. The house was silent around him. He clicked through the attached files, his movements slow and deliberate. There were receipts for couples' massages, for champagne sent to the room, for 2 tickets to a private boat tour. The evidence was clinical, indisputable, and devastating. He felt a profound coldness seep into his bones, a glacial calm that pushed aside the initial, white-hot surge of betrayal. This wasn't a moment for rage. Rage was a blunt instrument. This situation required the precision of a scalpel. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in the stillness, and looked around the room he had designed. Every line, every material, every source of light had been chosen with care to create a sanctuary, a home, and she had turned it into a lie. He opened a new file on his computer, a blank document. For a long moment, he stared at the blinking cursor. Then, with the same methodical precision he used to design a skyscraper, he began to type. It was a list of assets, a list of actions, a plan. The quiet architect was about to become a demolition expert. The first call Liam made was not to a friend or a family member, but to Evelyn Reed. He had met her years ago when he was acquiring the land for a complex mixed-use development project. She was the sharpest legal mind he had ever encountered, a woman who spoke in clauses and consequences, who saw the world as a series of contracts, binding and breakable. Her voice on the phone was exactly as he remembered it, crisp, efficient, devoid of sentimentality. "Liam," she said, her tone indicating she was already pulling up his file. "It's been a while. I trust your European projects are proceeding well." Evelyn was one of the few people who knew the true scope of his success. He had retained her firm for all his international work, valuing her discretion as much as her expertise. "They are, Evelyn. But this is a personal matter." He paused, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "It's about my wife." He laid it all out with dispassionate clarity. The evidence of the affair, the long-standing disrespect from her family, the financial entanglements, or rather, the lack thereof. He explained that the house, the cars, and their liquid assets were all products of his work, held in trusts and corporations that predated the marriage. He had been careful, not out of suspicion, but out of a deep-seated need for order and control that defined his architectural philosophy. He built things to last, on unshakable foundations. He had foolishly believed his marriage was one of them. Evelyn listened without interruption, the only sound on her end the faint scratching of a pen. When he finished, there was a brief silence. "I see," she said, the 2 words carrying a weight of understanding that was more comforting than any expression of sympathy. "The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. It was one of mine, after all. Her claims will be limited to a standard spousal support package for a short duration, as stipulated. Given the documented infidelity, even that could be contested, but it would be messy. A clean break is always better." "I want to be clean," Liam agreed. "And fast. I want the house on the market by the time she returns in 2 weeks." "Aggressive timeline, but doable," Evelyn replied, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I'll have the paperwork drafted by end of day. I'll need you to authorize the transfer of her personal effects into storage. We'll document everything meticulously. We give her no room to claim mistreatment or malice. This will be a procedural dissolution of a partnership, nothing more." "Thank you, Evelyn." "One more thing, Liam," she added, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Are you all right?" The question hung in the air. He looked out his office window, at the garden, at the Japanese maple tree whose leaves were just beginning to turn a fiery red. He had planted it with Chloe the first year they moved in. "I will be," he said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. "I'm just redesigning my life." The days that followed were a blur of quiet, focused activity. Professional movers, vetted by Evelyn's firm, arrived and packed Chloe's belongings with an almost surgical precision. They moved through the house like ghosts, emptying her closet, her bathroom, her side of the bedroom. Liam watched for a time, a strange detachment settling over him as he saw the physical evidence of their shared life being cataloged and crated away. He felt a pang, not of love, but of nostalgia for the man he had been, the man who had believed in the blueprint they had drawn together. That man was gone. In his place was someone leaner, harder, a man who saw the structural flaws and knew the only solution was to clear the site and start again. He worked from his home office, coordinating with his project managers in Berlin and Tokyo, his focus absolute. His work had always been his refuge, a world of logic and order where problems had elegant solutions. While Chloe was sipping limoncello on the Amalfi Coast, blissfully unaware, Liam was finalizing the schematics for a new museum of modern art, a building of soaring glass and steel that would redefine a city skyline. He was operating on a level she couldn't even conceive of, and the contrast was stark. One evening, he got a call from her. Her voice was light, breezy, laced with the manufactured warmth she used when she wanted to ensure things were fine on the home front. Darling, just checking in. How are things? Quiet, he said, the single word a double-edged sword. He was looking at the empty space in their bedroom, where her vanity used to be. Oh, good. I'm having the most amazing time. You wouldn't believe the views. I'm really finding myself, you know, she said, the cliché hanging in the air between them. I'm glad to hear that, Chloe, he replied, his voice a mask of calm. He held a small, black leather-bound ledger in his hand. It was an old-fashioned habit, but in it, he kept a private record of the assets and investments that existed entirely outside their shared life, the true source of his wealth. He ran his thumb over the smooth cover. It was his symbolic object, the physical manifestation of the truth she had never cared to see. You should take all the time you need. You're so sweet. I knew you'd understand, she cooed, completely missing the chilling finality in his tone. Anyway, I have to run. Big dinner tonight. I'll call you in a few days. Love you. The line went dead. He didn't say it back. He simply closed the ledger, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the silent room. The quiet before the storm was almost over. He could feel the pressure building, the air growing thick with unspoken truths. The demolition was on schedule. The call from his father-in-law came 3 days before Chloe was due to return. Richard's voice was a familiar blend of feigned bonhomie and condescension. Liam, my boy, just calling to check on you. Must be rattling around in that big house all by yourself. Eleanor and I were saying, you should come for dinner on Sunday. It was not an invitation, it was a summons, a way to remind him of his place in their orbit. Thank you for the offer, Richard, but I'm quite busy at the moment, Liam said politely, his eyes on a freshly printed for sale sign leaning against his office wall, ready to be installed. Busy? Busy with what? Richard chuckled, the sound dismissive. Don't tell me one of your clients wants to move a window. Listen, I actually had a reason for calling. My firm is looking at a new lease for our headquarters. The old Callahan building downtown. Prime real estate. The negotiations are a bit sticky, dealing with some anonymous holding company out of Zurich. Thought you might know someone who knows someone in your little architectural circles. Liam felt a cold, sharp thrill, a moment of perfect karmic alignment. The Callahan building. He owned it. It was one of his first major commercial investments, purchased through a Swiss holding company for the precise reason of maintaining anonymity. He had been planning to redevelop it in the next 5 years. Richard, in his boundless arrogance, was unknowingly trying to lease space from the son-in-law he held in such low esteem. This was the moment for the verbal chess match to begin, but it was not yet time for checkmate. He moved a pawn. I'm afraid I don't know anyone connected to that, Richard, Liam said, his voice impeccably smooth. He let a bead of silence pass. But I hear it's a magnificent structure. A solid foundation is everything, isn't it? Foundation? It's a gold mine, my boy, a gold mine. You wouldn't get it. Anyway, the offer stands for Sunday. Don't be a stranger. Richard hung up, leaving Liam in the quiet of his office. Liam looked from the sign to the black ledger on his desk. He opened it to the page detailing the Callahan building acquisition. The numbers were neat, precise, and irrefutable. Richard wasn't just blind. He was living in a world of his own creation, a world where he was the king and everyone else was a subject. He had no idea that the quiet man he patronized held the deed to his future castle. The weight of the impending confrontation settled on Liam, not as a burden, but as a ballast. He felt steady, centered. He had spent years absorbing their casual cruelty, their dismissiveness, their utter lack of curiosity about who he truly was. He had mistaken his own patience for love and their arrogance for strength. The final days passed in a state of heightened awareness. Every tick of the clock was a countdown. He walked through his house one last time. It was a beautiful design, a place of clean lines and abundant light. He had built it for them, for a future that had turned out to be a fiction. But a good architect knows that a structure is only as strong as its inhabitants. This one had suffered a critical failure. He felt a sense of loss, but it was clean, like the grief for something already long dead. On the morning of Chloe's return, he woke before dawn. The air was cool and crisp. He took the sign from his office and walked out to the front lawn. The grass was damp with dew. He positioned the sign in the center of the lawn, a perfect placement, aesthetically balanced and impossible to miss. He pushed the metal legs deep into the soft earth. The sound it made was a dull, final thud, a period at the end of a very long sentence. He stepped back and looked at it. The red and white stood out starkly against the green grass and the gray stone of the house. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of truth. It was a statement of fact. This chapter was over. He went back inside, made a cup of coffee, and sat in the living room to wait. The quiet before the storm had ended. The first drops of rain were about to fall. Chloe's arrival was exactly as he had pictured it. The sound of the taxi, the pause on the curb, the hesitant steps toward the door. He watched on the security monitor, a small screen in his office that showed the front porch. He saw the flicker of confusion on her face, then the dawning horror as she processed the sign. He watched as she fumbled with her key, her movements frantic, and then pushed open the unlocked door. He heard her call his name, her voice echoing in the empty foyer. He remained in his office, listening, as she found the envelope on the coffee table. He heard the sharp tear of paper, followed by a profound, deathly silence. The silence lasted for 3 full minutes. He imagined her standing there, the note in her hand, her world tilting on its axis. Then came the rage. He heard her phone being snatched from her purse, the furious tapping of her fingers, and then the muffled, high-pitched torrent of her voice as she spoke to her father. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, pure, undiluted fury. This was the Chloe he knew. When cornered, when her perfect world was threatened, she didn't crumble. She attacked. He stood up from his desk and walked calmly out of the office, down the hall, and into the living room. She was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her back to him. "I don't know what he's playing at, Daddy, but you need to get over here right now. He's locked me out. He's put a sign on the lawn. He's lost his mind." Liam stopped at the edge of the room. "I haven't lost my mind, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. She whirled around, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She looked magnificent in her anger, her face flushed, her travel-rumpled clothes somehow adding to the drama of the moment. "Liam, what the hell is this? A for sale sign? A note? Are you insane?" She snapped at her father on the phone. "He's here. Just get here. And bring Marcus." She hung up, her gaze fixed on him, burning with indignation. "It's not a game," he said, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were a third-party observer, a mediator in a conflict that no longer truly touched him. "It's a consequence." "A consequence for what?" she spat, taking a step toward him. "For taking a trip for myself? For needing some space after years of this quiet, boring life." He didn't rise to the bait. He didn't mention Alistair Finch. Not yet. That was a card to be played later when the audience was assembled. "The life you found so boring is over," he stated simply. "The house is being sold." "Our house?" she shrieked, a laugh of disbelief bubbling in her throat. "You can't sell our house, you idiot. I own half of it." "That's a common misconception," he replied, his voice still maddeningly calm. "I suggest you wait for your father to arrive." It might be more efficient to explain this only once. Her jaw dropped. The sheer audacity of his composure, of his control over a situation she had always dominated, left her momentarily speechless. She had expected tears, shouting, pleading. She had expected the familiar, wounded Liam she could manipulate and, eventually, forgive on her own terms. She had not expected this cold, resolute stranger who stood before her as if he were discussing a business transaction. The power dynamic, the one she had so carefully cultivated and taken for granted for their entire marriage, was shifting beneath her feet, and the ground felt terrifyingly unstable. She looked around the room, at the home she had considered her stage, and for the first time, she saw it for what it was, a set that was being dismantled around her. The wait for her family to arrive was the longest 20 minutes of her life, a silent, high-stakes standoff in the wreckage of her marriage. The arrival of the cavalry was not the triumphant moment Chloe had anticipated. Her father's luxury sedan squealed to a halt in the driveway, and Richard and Marcus burst out, their faces set in grim, determined lines of masculine outrage. Eleanor followed a moment later, gliding from the car with the pained expression of someone forced to visit a distasteful relative. They stormed into the house without knocking, finding Liam standing calmly by the large picture window in the living room, Chloe pacing like a caged animal near the fireplace. "Liam," Richard barked, his voice accustomed to immediate deference. He pointed a thick finger at Liam. "What is the meaning of this? You've terrified your wife. Take that ridiculous sign off my daughter's lawn and apologize to her at once." Marcus stepped forward, flanking his father. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull, but you're way out of your league. You're going to regret this." Liam turned from the window, his expression placid. He looked at the three of them. Richard, puffed up with indignation. Marcus, a sneer plastered on his face. Eleanor, hovering by the door as if afraid to touch anything. "Please, come in and have a seat," he said, gesturing to the sleek, minimalist sofa. The invitation was so contrary to the expected tone of the confrontation that it threw them off balance. "We're not here for a tea party," Richard snapped, though he did move further into the room. "I'm aware," Liam said, "but since this concerns the dissolution of my marriage and the disposition of my property, I thought it would be best to discuss it in a civilized manner." The phrase "my property" hung in the air. Chloe scoffed. "Your property? Don't be absurd, Liam. This is our home." "No, Chloe. It's my house," he corrected her gently. "It was purchased by a corporation of which I am the sole director, with funds I earned long before we were married. You're listed on the title as a resident, not an owner. Our prenuptial agreement is quite clear on that point." Richard's face, which had been a florid red, began to pale. He was a man who understood contracts and titles. "Prenuptial agreement? Chloe, you told me you didn't sign 1 inch." Chloe shot a panicked look at her father. "It was just some standard paperwork Liam's lawyer drew up. It didn't mean anything." "On the contrary," Liam said, his voice dropping into a lower, more serious register. "It means everything. It was designed to protect my assets in a situation precisely like this 1 inch." He finally looked directly at Chloe, his gaze unwavering. "A situation where my wife takes a 3-week trip to Italy to have an affair with Alistair Finch." The name landed in the room like a grenade. Chloe froze, the color draining from her face. Eleanor let out a small, horrified gasp. Marcus's sneer faltered. Only Richard seemed to rally, falling back on bluster. "That's a disgusting accusation. You have no proof." Liam didn't raise his voice. He simply walked to the coffee table and picked up a thin file folder that had been sitting there, unnoticed. He opened it and slid a document across the glass surface. "This is the folio from the Hotel Luz Sirenuse in Positano, billed to our shared credit card. The reservation is for Mr. and Mrs. Alistair Finch. It includes receipts for couples massages, champagne for 2, and a private boat tour for 2. There's several more pages just like it." Silence. The documents lay on the table, a quiet, damning testament to the truth. Chloe stared at them, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She had been caught, not by a suspicious snoop, but by a simple, automated paper trail. Her carelessness was a direct result of her underestimation of him. She never imagined he would look or that he would understand what he was seeing. This was the quiet bomb, but it was only the first of several. The affair is merely the reason for the dissolution, Liam continued, his tone that of a lecturer explaining a complex theorem. It is the moral justification. The logistical justification is, and always has been, financial. He looked at Richard. You and your family have operated under the assumption that I was a moderately successful architect who married into your sphere of influence. You believed that Chloe's lifestyle, her clothes, her car, her frequent trips, the funding for her failed jewelry business, was subsidized by your family's wealth. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You are mistaken. For the past 10 years, every aspect of Chloe's life has been funded exclusively by me. My firm, a quiet little company you never bothered to ask about, has offices in 5 countries and currently manages over $1 billion in development projects. The money you thought I didn't have, Richard, I have it. The zeros you didn't think I could comprehend, Marcus, they're on my balance sheets. He let that revelation settle before delivering the final, devastating blow. He turned his calm, analytical gaze back to Richard. By the way, Richard, regarding your firm's lease negotiations for the Callahan building, I've spoken with my asset manager in Zurich. We've decided not to renew any leases. We're moving forward with a full redevelopment plan next quarter. You'll have 6 months to vacate. I'm sorry if that's an inconvenience. The structure of their arrogance, the foundation of their condescension, crumbled into dust in that moment. Richard looked as if he'd been physically struck, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Marcus stared at Liam with a new, terrified respect. Eleanor had sunk onto the edge of a chair, her polished veneer completely shattered. And Chloe was looking at the man she had been married to for a decade and realizing she had never known him at all. The quiet, gentle man she had dismissed as boring and predictable was a titan, and she had treated him like a footstool. The full, catastrophic scale of her mistake was finally, crushingly clear. The immediate aftermath of the revelation was a tableau of stunned silence. The 4 of them, Chloe, Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus, were frozen, caught in the blast wave of Liam's quiet bombs. The power in a room had not just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic reversal. Liam, who had for years been the quiet observer at their gatherings, the target of their condescending remarks, was now the undisputed center of gravity. He held all the cards, and they were just beginning to understand how poor their own hand was. Richard was the first to break, his bluster completely gone, replaced by a desperate, wheezing panic. The Callahan building? Liam, you can't be serious. Our entire corporate expansion is dependent on that location. We've already signed secondary contracts. It would ruin us to pull out now. It would be a significant financial setback, yes, Liam acknowledged, his voice devoid of triumph. It was a simple statement of fact. Perhaps you should have been more thorough in your due diligence regarding the building's ownership. He didn't add, perhaps you should have been a better father-in-law. But the implication was clear. This was poetic justice, a consequence directly linked to the transgression. Marcus, for the first time in his life, looked at Liam without a sneer. He looked at him with fear. Liam, man, we had no idea. We were just joking around. You know how we are. The excuse was so flimsy, so pathetic that it died in the air. I know exactly how you are, Liam said, his gaze sweeping over them. You are a family that measures a person's worth by their perceived wealth and status. You are dismissive of anything and anyone you deem beneath you. You never once asked me a single substantive question about my work, my ambitions, or my life. You simply assigned me a role, the unimpressive husband, and expected me to play it. He then turned his full attention to Chloe, who was still standing, pale and trembling, by the fireplace. And you, Chloe, you're the worst of them all, because you knew. You lived with me. You saw the hours I worked. You saw the passion I had for what I do. But you chose to see me through their eyes. You chose to be embarrassed by my quiet nature instead of proud of my quiet strength. You didn't just betray our marriage vows. You betrayed the very idea of partnership. You sought out a man like Alistair Finch because he was a reflection of your family's shallow values. He was easy. His wealth was loud. Mine was not. Tears began to stream down Chloe's face, not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity and shock. "Liam, please," she whispered, the word a desperate plea. "We can fix this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I love you." The words, which might once have shattered his resolve, now felt hollow, meaningless. "No, Chloe, you love the life I provided, and that life is no longer available to you." He gestured to the door. "My lawyer's name is on the sign. She has the details for the storage unit and a check for the initial spousal support payment, as stipulated in our agreement. I believe your family came to give you a ride." The finality was absolute. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice thin and reedy. "You can't just throw her out, Liam. She's your wife. She is, for a few more weeks, until the divorce is finalized," a new voice said from the doorway. Evelyn Reed stood there, a leather briefcase in her hand. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of lethal competence. She had obviously been waiting for her cue, and, as her husband, he is acting entirely within his legal rights. Everything is in order. Evelyn's presence was the final nail in the coffin of their hopes. This wasn't just Liam acting out in a fit of pique. This was a calculated, legally fortified strategy. They were utterly and completely outmaneuvered. Richard seemed to shrink before their eyes, the powerful real estate mogul reduced to a sputtering, defeated old man. Marcus just stared, his mind clearly racing as he calculated the damage to the family business. Chloe finally broke, a sob racking her body. She looked at Liam, her eyes begging for a reprieve, for a flicker of the old, gentle man she had married. But that man was gone, his place taken by this calm, resolute stranger who was methodically dismantling her world. He simply met her gaze, his expression not of hatred, but of a profound and unshakable peace. He had made his decision. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to clear the rubble. The weeks that followed were a study in consequences. The for sale sign on Liam's lawn was quickly replaced by a sold sign. The house, a masterpiece of modern design in a highly sought-after neighborhood, was purchased in a private sale for a record-breaking sum by a tech billionaire who appreciated its architectural integrity. Liam never had to endure a single open house. He moved his personal belongings into a sleek penthouse apartment downtown, a property he had owned for years as an investment, and began the process of setting up his new life. The space was different, all glass and steel with panoramic city views, but it felt more honest, more aligned with the man he had become. For Chloe and her family, the consequences were far more public and humiliating. Chloe was forced to move back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' house, a gilded cage that now felt suffocating. Her solo trip to Italy became the subject of vicious gossip within their social circle, the story of her affair and subsequent eviction spreading like wildfire. The friends who had once flocked to her parties now avoided her calls. She was no longer the wife of a quiet architect. She was the disgraced ex-wife of a quiet genius who had, it turned out, been one of the most powerful men in their city all along. The story was too delicious, too steeped in irony, for anyone to resist. Her status, the currency she valued above all else, was gone. Richard's company, as Liam had predicted, suffered a catastrophic blow. Losing the Callahan Building lease was not just an inconvenience. It was a public humiliation that signaled a loss of influence. Clients became wary, partners pulled back, and a deal that was meant to be his crowning achievement became the symbol of his greatest failure. He was forced into a series of deeply unfavorable short-term leases in a less prestigious part of the city, a move that damaged both his finances and his ego. The man who had mocked Liam for designing patios for dentists was now desperately trying to keep his own company from collapsing. Marcus, stripped of the unearned confidence that came from his father's success, was lost. He tried to approach Liam once, catching him outside a coffee shop. "Liam, look, I'm sorry," he'd stammered, his usual swagger gone. "What my dad, What we said, it was out of line. Liam had looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. It wasn't out of line, Marcus. It was who you are. The only thing that's changed is your perception of my bank account. The apology is meaningless. He hadn't waited for a reply, simply walking away, leaving Marcus standing on the pavement, grappling with a truth he was ill-equipped to handle. Chloe's life became a series of painful adjustments. Without the unlimited funds she was used to, she had to confront the reality of her own lack of skills. Her jewelry business had been a vanity project, propped up by Liam's money. With that gone, it quickly folded. She tried to find work, but her resume was a flimsy collection of charity events and board memberships that had been secured by her family's name, a name that was now tarnished. She saw Alistair Finch once at a restaurant. He was with another woman, younger and prettier. He met Chloe's eyes across the room and gave a small, dismissive nod before turning away. His message clear. She was part of a pleasant vacation, nothing more. She had traded a diamond for a piece of sea glass, and now the tide had gone out. One afternoon, Liam received a formal letter from Chloe's lawyer, a different one from the family's usual firm. It was a handwritten note from Chloe, tucked inside. Her handwriting was less flamboyant than he remembered, the loops and flourishes gone, replaced by something smaller, more contained. Liam, it read, I know there is nothing I can say that will change what happened. I don't expect your forgiveness, and I am not writing to ask for it. I am writing to say that you were right. About everything. About my family, about my values, about me. I was blind, and I built my life on a foundation of vanity. I'm living with the consequences of that now. I hope one day you can think of the good years we had without the bitterness of how it ended. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. Chloe. He read the letter twice. It was the first honest communication she had ever sent him. There was no manipulation in it, no hidden agenda. It was the sound of someone who had finally hit bottom and was looking up for the first time. He felt a flicker of the old affection he'd had for her, a sadness for the woman she could have been. He folded the letter and put it away. It didn't change anything, but it was an acknowledgement, a closing of a door that had been left ajar. The moral mirror had been held up, and she had finally, painfully, looked at her own reflection. Months turned into a year. The divorce was finalized, a quiet, procedural affair. Liam poured his energy into his work, finding solace and purpose in creation. His new museum project was breaking ground, a testament to his vision and resilience. He had reconnected with old friends he had neglected during his marriage, people who liked him for his quiet humor and sharp mind, not for his wealth, which most of them were still unaware of. His life became smaller, but infinitely richer. He heard through a mutual acquaintance that Chloe had moved away. She had enrolled in a design school in a different city, using the last of her spousal support to pay the tuition. She was living in a small apartment, working a part-time job in a cafe to make ends meet. She was, for the first time in her life, building something of her own from the ground up. It was a small beginning, but it was hers. The acquaintance said she seemed quieter, humbled. Liam found himself hoping she would succeed. His anger had long since faded, replaced by a deep, quiet wisdom. He had not sought revenge. He had sought truth. He had not set out to destroy her, but to save himself. The consequences that had befallen her and her family were not his doing. They were the inevitable result of a structure built on a faulty foundation. It was bound to collapse. He had simply been the one to point out the cracks. One evening, he was standing on the balcony of his penthouse, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city lights. Down below, he could see the steel skeleton of his new museum rising into the night sky. A building, he thought, is an honest thing. It cannot pretend to be stronger than it is. Its integrity is written in its bones, in its foundation, for all to see. People, he had learned, were much the same. True worth wasn't in the facade, in the expensive cladding, or the ornate decorations. It was in the hidden strength, the core integrity that allowed you to withstand the storms. He had been tested, and his foundation had held. He had faced the humiliation, the betrayal, and the confrontation, and he had done so without sacrificing his own principles. He had maintained his dignity, his moral high ground. He thought about the future, a blank blueprint waiting for a new design. He felt a sense of boundless possibility, a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson, that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned, and that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. He had won, not by being louder or crueler, but by being truer to himself. And that was a victory that would last a lifetime. The pain of the past had been the necessary demolition before a beautiful new construction. He was the architect of his own life, and he was finally ready to build again. The story of Liam and Chloe became a quiet legend in their city, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and business lunches. It was a story about what happens when you underestimate the person sleeping next to you, when you value appearances over substance. The core lesson was simple, yet profound. True worth is not displayed, it is embodied. Patience and integrity, over time, will always triumph over arrogance and vanity. Liam's actions weren't born of vengeance, but of a deep and abiding respect for the truth. He simply removed the lies, and the entire hollow structure of Chloe's world came crashing down. He taught everyone, most of all Chloe herself, that redemption isn't about being forgiven by others, but about finally building a life worthy of your own self-respect. What do you think about Liam's approach? Was it a perfect execution of justice, or was it too cold? We all face moments where we feel underestimated, and I think that's why stories like this resonate so deeply. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this journey, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength and deserved vindication. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.